We got a full Zoom house tonight. Look at this.
Do we?
God. Woo! You're gonna break the Zoom mundo, Jaime.
What?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Oh man. Okay, we better start then. We got full house. Buenas noches, buenas tardes, I should say. What a bunch of beautiful faces in the Zoom mundo tonight. For those of you that don't know where you are, please let me welcome you to City Lights Live. This is City Lights Bookstores online and Zoom Mundo event series, where we continue to bring you authors, poets, and assorted rebel rousers of the profound and important kind, just like we used to do back in the day up in the poetry room before the ancient pandemic closed us down. We're so very excited to be celebrating the book release of the one and only Jaime Cortez's nuevo libro, Gordo. Woo, look at this. Give it some Zoom Mundo love, people. Look at this beautiful cover. And Jaime, as if this wasn't enough, Jaime is going to be joined this evening by none other than Rebecca Solnit. So y'all are in for a real treat tonight, for sure. Let me first please read both of these wonderful people's bios, and then we'll get down to it, all right? The star of the evening, Jaime Cortez, as you all very well know, is a graphic novelist, visual artist, writer, teacher, and occasional performer. Jaime has historically used art and humor to explore sexuality, social justice, HIV/AIDS, and a Chicano identity. And joining him in conversation tonight, another San Pancho, San Francisco treasure, Rebecca Solnit, is a writer, historian, activist, and the author of more than 20 books on feminism, Western and indigenous history, popular power, social change and insurrection, wanderings and walking, hope and disaster. Yes. She's received numerous honors for her work. These include the Guggenheim Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Kirkus Prize for Nonfiction, and the Lannan Literary Award. Rebecca's memoir, Recollections of My Nonexistence, was released in March 2020. Yeah, y'all, so this is gonna be very special. Also tonight, we are gonna have a Q&A at the end of Rebecca and Jaime's conversation and reading. So all those burning questions that you always wanted to ask Jaime, here's your chance. Por favorcito, post them in the comments section of the Zoom chat, and we will get to them at the end of the event, okay? Also, we're gonna be posting a link to Jaime's wonderful book. If you already haven't purchased several copies, here's your chance to do so. Support the wonderful writer and support City Lights. So yeah, the link will be in the book, the comment section there, okay? So without any further plática on my part, let's get down to this. Por favorcito, welcome the one and only Jaime Cortez and the one and only Rebecca Solnit.
This is so great. I'm just so overjoyed. I feel like here's this yellow book. We're at the end of the yellow brick road on getting this book to be a thing on its publication day. But before I start cross-examining the Jaime, we were going to start with a little reading.
Thank you for the brief intros, everybody. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm looking at some of these faces and names here, and I'm very touched to see. Sorry. That caught me by surprise. It was just very emotional to see so many friends from so many different aspects of my life and different points in my life. So thank you, everybody, for showing up. It's lovely, and I'm really happy to see you here. Raimundo the Fag was the first of the stories that I ever wrote for this book. Of course, when I wrote it, I had no intention at all of doing a book. I was just writing short stories. And over the years, it turned into a little pile of stories, and now it's a book. But this was the earliest of them. So today I'll be reading to you from my earliest story, and then also from the newest story. So I'll start with this. This is a story of Raimundo the Fag, a story about the truce that the town queer can make with his town. So here we go. Raimundo the Fag. Raimundo the Fag's great gift and burden was to look any woman in the face and envision the perfect hairdo for her. The route to maximum beauty always seemed clear to him, a luminous path that glowed as if marked in reflective highway paint. When asked, he told his clients the truth and pointed the way to the Via Bella, but not everyone was ready to walk that narrow path. Sadly, they could not imagine the glories of what he saw for them, the haircut that soared beyond fashion and even taste to hover in the rarefied realm of eleganza. None of this could they see on their march towards the unholy mirage of their preferred haircut. Raimundo always gave his clients what they asked for, but each time they declined his offer of eleganza, they unknowingly pricked his heart. Like all prophets, he suffered horribly. For consolation, he cast himself back to his childhood Sunday school classes, where he once asked Sister Sarah, "Have you always been a nun?" When she began her reply by uttering, "Way back when I was a child," he was visibly shocked. It had not occurred to Raimundo that nuns were ever anything else. He had never seen a baby nun, of course, but like the proverbial baby pigeons that no one has ever seen, baby nuns had to exist somewhere, immaculately conceived and beatifically rolling Play-Doh nativity scenes in preschools. Sister Sarah smiled and said, "I felt my vocation early on." She read his confusion and continued, "My vocation was God talking to me and telling me to commit myself to service in the church. It's like a voice that helped me know what I'm supposed to do." Vocation seemed to Raimundo a word of magic, enfolding destiny, passion, and work. Vocation became the grail that shimmered just beyond Raimundo's fingertips as he labored at Bibi's Beauty Box, the grande dame of Watsonville's beauty salons. As he went about his work, he wondered if mere haircutting could constitute so exalted a thing. No one else doubted Raimundo's talents. He was barely 21 years old and less than 2 years out of beauty college, but he already had the biggest client base in the salon. He initially had only random walk-ins and a handful of old friends as clients, but their numbers swelled quickly. His regulars were unflagging in their loyalty and fervent in their evangelizing on his behalf. Such was the case with Cookie, a regular who waved at him through the window as she approached. Even before she crossed the threshold of Bibi's Beauty Box, he began appraising her. She was cute and plump in a way that captivated and wounded the migrant lettuce pickers who gathered about the Watsonville City Plaza to watch the girls go by on Thursday evenings when the Main Street shops had weekly sidewalk sales. Cookie's skin was a perfect even brown, and she favored the severe chola makeup of the time with dark lipstick, heavy eyeliner, and meticulously drawn eyebrows. Her face was forever girlish in its pleasant roundness. He could also see that she had been faithful with her regimen of brushing and conditioning, the silken shifting of her hair, of hair that animated her every step, started a tickle in his belly. He could see the optimal Cookie cut, but alas, she held up a copy of People magazine. The cover featured the 3 pretty stars of Charlie's Angels, the wildly popular female detective show. The 2 brunette angels flanked the blonde angel. He braced himself, knowing what was coming next. "Hey, Mundo," said Cookie, can you do me a cut like hers in the picture?" "You mean the Farrah Fawcett cut?" "Yeah, the Farrah, all feathered on the sides like that, but bigger." "Hey, Cookie, this cut is nice and it's so popular right now, but can I tell you about another cut that you might like?" "No, homie, I don't want a Dorothy Hamill or wherever you're thinking." "Who said anything about a Dorothy Hamill, Ray? If that's too short for you, I want to recommend Don't. My mind is made up and I want the Farrah." "Okay, chica, the Farrah it is."
Oh, I love that story. I have a really funny story about it I want to tell, which is in 2010, I did a San Francisco Atlas with a ton of San Franciscans, including, and Jaime was the first person I asked, but I only knew him as a visual artist. He did a beautiful map for me, and he was holding out that he could have written an essay that went with it. In 2011, I had a dinner party at which he read this story, and I both fell in love with his writing and was just completely annoyed that he'd been holding out on me and I didn't get to have him write something for the Atlas. But then I began to basically forced him to show me more of his stories, and they were just amazing. Cookie, for those of you who haven't yet fallen in love with her, I think shows up in at least 4 of the stories.
It is in 3,
And,
yes.
yeah, and how was it that you thought of yourself as a visual artist, not a writer? And I should also tell the audience that you have both a graphic novel that was deals with AIDS and a trans protagonist that came out in 1996.
2004 was when it came out.
2004,
Yeah.
and an anthology called Virgins, Guerrillas, and Locas, gay Latinos writing about love in 1989. So in a way, this is your 3rd book as well as your 1st book. But we all knew you as a visual artist mostly, and this stuff, I'm curious kind of how different the 2 identities feel. And
I think there's an interesting, well, at least interesting to me, way that they interact with each other, and it has to do with when I do visual art, it tends to be full of story. It's very kind of narrative work. It's representational. It's narrative. There's a lot of story packed into it. And then conversely, when I do writing, there's actually a lot of very concrete imagery that goes into it. I think of myself as someone who, when I'm writing a story, it's a movie that's running through my head, and I'm seeing things. I see the things, and I'm intrigued in the ways that characters that using dialogue and action, the characters' kind of inner life unfolds. So in my books, there's not a lot of focus on the inner dialogue of a character. There's a lot of focus on the dialogue they have with others and what the actions are and what things look like. So I tend to be a very visual and concrete writer.
Also, speaking of stories, one of the things that's curious about this book is that it reads in some ways like a memoir. It's not too far astray from a lot of contemporary novels where you have multiple points of view and protagonists that recur and weave in and out. And it could also be cast as a version of, as short stories, of course, interlocking short stories about the same place, with Gordo as the protagonist in most, but not all of them. But I kind of love the sense that story is the common denominator, and that these categories aren't necessarily helpful for understanding what you're doing. And I wonder how that resonates for you.
I do think that, before I started doing visual art when I was about 8, I stole some money out of my mom's purse to buy a drawing pad. And so that was the beginning of my life of crime and art. But even before that, I think I was already in an intensive storytelling boot camp. I come from storytellers. My mom was a fantastic raconteur. My dad was a very funny guy. My grandparents were funny as well. So I have, that was my first kind of infusion of creativity and world making, was through oral storytelling. And I think that continues to inform me. When I write, I read my stories out loud. I need to hear it coming out of my mouth and back into my ears to understand if it's doing what I hope it does. And so storyteller, I think, is probably the primary identity I would kind of take onto myself before memoirist or short story writer. I like a yarn. And so, yeah, that's an appropriate, I think, designation for me, storyteller.
Did you think of writing this as a memoir at any point? Or did it just be like that imposed?
It was kind of slippery in a lot of ways, Rebecca. I think that the stories are all semi-autobiographical, and some of them are extremely close to what really happened. And so they all have that really strong base in actual people. It's funny, I have a friend who, Claire Light, who just released a wonderful novel, an urban fantasy novel set in San Francisco. And, I was thinking about her work because she had to invent all these people, all these characters. And by comparison, all I had to do was bring them back. because I already knew these people, I already knew these characters. So I didn't have to kind of create characters for the most part. I knew who they were already, and I kind of knew where they were going as well. So I was eased of the burden of having to a whole cloth creation of a world.
Did you feel some sort of responsibility or mandate to represent these communities with respect or precision or anything like that? And, you know, writing specifically about communities that a lot of us don't know very well, and, you know, is part of what was exciting for me about this work is I've been in California since before I was 5. Farm worker struggles were in the background most of my life. But just because, you know, you didn't eat grapes growing up and you knew who Cesar Chavez was, doesn't mean you knew how people in the garlic fields and the lettuce fields and the strawberry fields were, for those of us outside that world. And so I wonder what kind of ties, obligation, responsibility towards those communities you felt, and in what ways you felt that you were an individual artist, but doing something foreign with this collective.
You know, it's an interesting one how we, when we choose to represent lives of people who, you know, historically have been very marginalized, people on the edge of the economy, people on the edge of legality, people on the kind of edge of acceptability, in this case, undocumented farm workers in the 70s. And some of them are undocumented, some of them are documented, but it's, you know, people who are pretty, if nothing else, economically marginal, and also kind of racially marginalized. So when you take it upon yourself to do these stories, even though that is my actual experience, I still, you know, felt a tremendous sense of responsibility, not to make people look good, but to make them as three-dimensional and human as I knew how to. I wanted that fullness of humanity in the people that populate this book. In my book, there are people who do brutal things to each other. But in my book, there are no villains. There are just people who are living literally with ignorance. They don't know better. That's the way they know to handle their difficulties or frustrations or challenges. And so I am interested in that question of just that fullness that we all have in us, our kindness, our brutality, our selfishness, our capacity to sacrifice for others. All of it needs to sit in productive tension with each other, kind of like real life.
The NPR sort of described you as John Steinbeck's heir in writing about agricultural life in this particular part of California. And I wonder how you feel about Steinbeck and what, you know, how you felt about being framed that way.
But you know, it's funny, like if you were a kid who grew up in this part of California, that coastal agricultural California, that kind of Watsonville, you know, Salinas, San Juan Bautista, San Benito area, if you grew up anywhere in that area, probably like from the 6th grade on, we were fed a steady diet of Steinbeck. And, you know, I can remember myself, like as part of class assignments, reading The Pearl, reading Of Mice and Men, reading Grapes of Wrath as my choice for the big book report at the end of senior year or something like that. And I just chose it because I thought, oh, that's a big fat book. This will be fancy, like to just read a big fat book. But so we grew up on a steady diet of that, and I have much respect for John Steinbeck as a writer. I have much appreciation that he cared to write about these people that he wrote about. So I have no you know, hesitation in just really praising him. As for kind of being mentioned in the same sentence with him, you know, it's an honor. It also feels a little bit overwhelming. I mean, you know, it's my first book out, and here you have this Nobel laureate with this vast, you know, array of tremendous books that he's written. So I do not delude myself about what it means to be mentioned in the context of that. But I do think it's appropriate to imagine how something like this fits into a lineage. of someone like Steinbeck, and I'm happy to be part of that lineage. Yeah.
You know, it's funny thinking about it, but growing up in the Bay Area, for me, everything I was given to read was about someplace else. And I sometimes feel kind of like Jamaica Kincaid growing up in Antigua and learning only about British plants and British history, a kind of colonial subject in that, you know, the only history I was taught was the Civil War and the Revolutionary War. I had a Platonist for 4th grade, so we didn't even make missions out of sugar cubes. You know, a Native California history was really dismissed in those days.
Yeah.
So I'm actually kind of stoked to hear that you were reading Steinbeck and whatever his strengths or limitations for our time, just to read something in which your own place, your own climate, your own kind of plants are mentioned must have been kind of exciting, in a sense that this place can be mythologized. You know, this place can turn into literature. And I had such a hard time finding my way to that. And
Yeah.
when I was younger.
It's an interesting thing, you know, the how much of a kind of a cultural or other sort of translation we have to do to put ourselves into books. And sometimes it's vast, and it's a delight to translate far, far away from ourselves. You know, I remember being a 7th grader and being, you know, absolutely engrossed reading The Hobbit, right? That was this massive act of translation into a whole other reality. And then Steinbeck was interesting. It was a much smaller feat of translation for me. Like, oh, okay, like I can picture that. Yeah, I could picture picking peaches because I've done that, you know. So that the translation piece becomes smaller, so then we get to our own, you know, my own writing, and I'm inviting people to translate themselves into these experiences of this place, this time, and these people. So yeah.
You know, one of the things that's really striking about your writing is that it's incredibly funny, and it performs that really delicate high wire act of being incredibly funny without being cruel. And I just wondered, have you thought seriously about how humor works, what makes something funny, how to be both tenderhearted and hilarious, and you know, how does that operate, and how much is what makes this amazing and lovely book, which everybody who hasn't clicked on the order link yet needs to click on, how much is it kind of a camp queer sensibility, that sense of humor brought to a subject we haven't seen it applied to so much before, you know, not in published work?
So, you know, Rebecca, I think about humor all the time. I'm always thinking about it. You know, I have before COVID, I had a brutal long work commute, and I would listen to Sirius Radio, the satellite radio, and I would listen to the comedy channels, and it got me thinking so much about humor and how it works, why it works, when it works, for whom it works, and all that kind of goes into being, quote, funny. So I came from funny people, and I came from people who, for whom humor was a basic and core survival mechanism. So when confronted with, you know, some of the terrors and horrors that people experience, to watch them be able to spin that into some kind of laughter, or to just let yourself breathe by laughing at it, it's so powerful and beautiful. It's also just, you know, the ultimate truth-telling and subversion machine is humor, right? That's how you unscrew the bolts on something without them seeing, is through the humor. And so I think about it a lot. You know, we're in a very interesting phase right now where we have, you know, humor is being contested a lot, like because of people's political sensitivities and who gets to make humor out of what and when. You know, it's a very hot and contested thing right now. So I think a lot about humor. In this book, it had to be that way. Like, I think that was the only way to tell the truth of what it meant to grow up with people who were constantly deploying gallows humor. I needed to be able to use that. The humor comes from their kind of humor, my parents and my grandparents' kind of humor. It's earthy, It's for reals, as they say, and it's almost unbeatable. Like you almost can't beat it down. Like when you see someone like that, like my parents or my grandparents get to the point where they've lost their humor about something, you know it's a grave situation. Like it has to get pretty bad to get to that point. So that's what I come from, and I hold on to that. I cherish that. And then I think that the gay kind of campy humor is also very much in effect. Like the constant, in this book, I didn't intend it to be such an exploration of gender at the level that it is, but as it turns out, it is. And that I think has a lot to do with campiness, which is all about calling out just how constructed gender is, and playing with it and subverting it. So I think that those are the two main strains of humor that are kind of informing this book, that of my birth family and that of queers.
I was very cognizant of the kind of queer camp sensibility and that sense of amusement at things, that kind of subversion that comes from not being bought into the way things are supposed to be and being enforcers of how things are supposed to be. But I hadn't really thought about the other half of it. I also hadn't really thought of it as a book being so deeply about gender, but the minute you say that, that makes sense to me. Is there anything you want to say about that? Because now I'm like, everyone could just watch me think about it, but I'd rather hear you unpack that.
It came so organically because I did not have an agenda around, oh, I'm a gender warrior, which, I respect a gender warrior, but that's not how I identify myself. I did not go in with that intention, but just in the most organic way, it just keeps resurfacing. I think that there's a bunch of very good reasons for it. One is being a mama's boy. So I was very attached to Mom, and I would watch her, and she was, my light. And so that was who I attached to. And I had 2 sisters and no brothers. So there was definitely plenty of that female energy that I grew up around and I felt more comfortable with. So that was one part of it. Then of course, in queerness, especially as you kind of come to accept it, built into it is this really thorough kind of examination of what does that mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be, quote, feminine? How do we play with that? So inevitably it comes up, and I think the book is also a lot about jockeying for power, the way kids jockey for power against other kids, brothers jockeying for power against brothers, husbands and wives, partners, lovers. It's so much about that, and again, to talk about that, I need to be able to also kind of be unpacking the question of gender if we're going to talk about power. So for a bunch of reasons, as it turns out, it was inevitable, though I never intended it to be.
It makes perfect sense now. And one of the things that's really moving in the book is the protagonist Gordo's kind of dawning recognition that he's not going to perform masculinity conventionally, and that there's probably going to be a huge price to pay for it. And then you also have Raimundo much further along that path and paying for it, getting beat up in junior high school and finding ways to deal with it, not wanting to tell his mother about it, and then eventually becoming accepted in his niche in the community. But and I found that really moving and really interesting, that sense of a kid not, and there's many points in the book where Gordo as the protagonist doesn't fully understand the adult world, but is exploring it and witnessing it and kind of looking and learning more than adults want him to. And
that was something that was probably one of the most interesting challenges as I kind of went through the stories and revisited them to kind of clean them up for the book, was that finding that kid voice that makes sense for me. And I think there would be 2 disasters that could have happened. One disaster was to sentimentalize a kid and what it means to be a child in these circumstances. So that would be one disaster. The other disaster would be to use that child character like a ventriloquist dummy to just get my adult perspectives out into the world. So my job was really to try to get back into my own head back then and think, what is the language that a child uses to explain a world of adults that sometimes feels incomprehensible and terrifying? The violence, the unspokenness of things. Like, how does a child make sense of that? What are the metaphors? What are the poetics of a bright, observant child who doesn't really understand everything he is seeing around him, but who has some basic instincts, who knows what fair and unfair looks like, and who knows how to read a room, who knows when things are getting dangerous. So that was the charge, and landing that voice, which is it's a tricky exercise. It was probably something I could spend the rest of my life trying to do and not quite master, but that was the charge that I gave myself, was to just get that voice right, and get the level right. And when I say level, I mean make him as smart as he is, but not more sophisticated than he is.
You know, which you did so beautifully. And it's really interesting because we all know that being an immigrant, being non-white, non-English speaking are forms of being outside, as is being non-straight, being queer. But what I think part of what makes the book so compelling is that you get to see that kids are outsiders. They have to join this world of adults at some point. And it's like immigrating to a kind of scary, hostile country that might destroy you, but you know, it's inevitable. You're going to become, well, almost inevitable. You're going to become an adult. You're supposed to take part in this world. You're learning its savage customs and weird traditions and what can and can't be talked about. And it doesn't quite make sense from a kid's point of view. And you capture that so beautifully. And also the way kids and adults are at cross purposes is so much part of the book. There's one story, I forget which, the one, you know, early in the book, where this indigenous family of 4 walks into the farm worker camp and they have almost nothing. And a lot of the power of the story is what the adults in your family see in these people, which is desperation and marginalization and need, and what you see, which is just these really interesting, unfamiliar people who also cook some, it's the story called Chorizo, cook some really tasty stuff. And that tension of what the adults want you to know and where they want you to be in relationship to that family is such a strong, kind of narrative portrayal of those pieces. And people are in the chat are just all saying, I love that story. And well, we're up to 119 people now. And
Wow, that's great. Yeah, you know, that story, that story in particular, I needed, like I really wanted to hit upon the hierarchies that happen even at the margins. So here you have people living on this migrant farm worker camp, and there's a hierarchy of who is documented, who is not documented, who has a proper house with a roof, who doesn't, who has networks and connections in that place, who doesn't. Like, the hierarchy is really clear. Who knows they are employable, who is trying to find out if they could possibly get work and survive. Like, all of those hierarchies are so much in place for me. And that in that story, I was really trying to get at what stratification looks like at the bottom of the barrel.
there's another wonderful story, the one where Gordo's dad buys him the Mexican wrestling gear and wants him to be, a kind of masculine fighter. And Gordo appreciates the clothes for all the wrong reasons, that they're kind of fancy dress up. They're pretty. And that wonderful tension between what the father wants the son to be and who the son really is. And the father just thinking he can somehow sort of mold him you know, the way that
Just-
a mold pressures at
Just buy him the right toys and they'll butch him up. That was the logic, right?
yeah, yeah.
I think that you know, that story, as I wrote it, I just really learned so much, and I felt great compassion for my dad, because he actually did do that when I was, I think, maybe 7 or 8. He bought me boxing gloves and this little kind of stand-up punching bag thing, and you know, he never got over the fact that I was not going to become a boxer, even into my teens. Like when he would get hammered, he would be telling me, "You should be a boxer. Look how big you are. God, yeah, you'd be a great fucking boxer." So he never quite got over that loss of his boxer son. But I think that in that story, I felt so much compassion for him, because for someone like him, a boy like me, it was like an extraterrestrial had landed in the house. Like, how to make sense of this. And also the terror of, you know, my dad grew up in very rough circumstances, and he literally had to fight his way through everything as a kid. He had to work from the time he was 4 years old by himself. He had to defend his money when he was selling newspapers as a little newsboy. And that's how he understood the world. And the idea of a soft boy going out into the world, I think it terrified him. Like, how to protect this soft boy in a hard world. I think that was really difficult. And this is what he knew to do, was, okay, well, at least if he can box, he can defend himself, right? It was that kind of logic. And of course, the tragic comedy is what happens when you cannot see your child for what they are. You can't see them, and that's poignant to me. I'm watching my sisters raising their children, and I was very touched. You know, at some point I realized, oh my God, they actually see their kids. Like they see them for who they are, not for what they need or want them to be, and it's beautiful.
I just have to read you from the chat that Heather Smith said, one of my dreams for this book is that it gets Jaime a celebrity sneaker design deal and he replicates those shoes.
With the tassels on the side, so it looks extra pretty.
Yes, Lord. Are there more stories coming? Are you thinking about, and would it be like a sequel? Would it move out of this community? Is Gordo gonna persist, or will it be a completely different set?
I think I have unfinished business with this community and these characters, and I think you know, I've already started building up the list, and I feel like, okay, there's definitely another book in here, and it might just take them through maybe a different life phase when they're a bit older. But there's so many stories, and that's one kind of nice thing, just to have that storyteller mind. It's like they're endless. There's so many stories.
One of the remarkable things you did in a way is you moved back to Watsonville after decades in San Francisco and Oakland. And I wonder if that makes you feel like you're back with those communities one way or another, and you're with your sisters, you're living in your parents' house. But,
Yeah.
you know, do you feel like you're, you know, is it putting you back in that world in some ways, or in some ways, do you feel like you've exited and it's not quite available for you to re-enter like that?
You know, I've been living in the home of my late parents, and it was funny that the home was unoccupied for a time, and my sisters didn't even want to go visit it. It was just too painful, too sad. Me, I was like, from the beginning, I love being there with my ghosts. I love being there with my memories. I love tending to the fruit trees they left behind. So I have that, and but I think there's also something about, you know, that is home to me. I really feel that, and I'm so grateful for that. I think there are people who sometimes maybe will go their whole life without feeling a deep sense of home. I do feel like that's home, and I'm grateful for that. I also know that, you know, having gone away into so many different settings, urban settings, even different countries, you know, living in Philadelphia and Boston and Oakland and San Francisco and in Japan for a couple of years, you know, you come back and you are of it and no longer of it. you know, and I live there. I feel almost like an observer, it's almost anthropological sometimes. So this is my community, this is home, this is what made me, and I am in it and I am outside of it at the same time. So it's kind of an interesting thing to come back home.
I've been asking you a lot about content and context, but I also want to call everyone's attention to just what beautiful prose it is, and what makes it beautiful is what makes it insightful, and vice versa. I'm going to read a few passages from my favorite story, The Nasty Book Wars, which I, ran across early before the whole book was assembled and was just crazy about. And
so just to provide a slight bit of context, this is a story that takes place in the, well before everyone had access to all the pornography in the world. So it was in the era of paper porno, and it's about what happens when a bunch of kids find a massive stash of pornography.
And one of the things that I love about the story is that it probably would have been beaten to death in one of those kind of writers' workshop group settings where everyone tries to normalize you and apply the rules, because the first third of it is about Preemie, this kind of schlumpy, like melting grapefruit shaped, undocumented guy. And then he gets busted by La Migra and disappears, and the last 2/3 of the story are about the kids and their fight over his porn collection. But just the passages in it are so striking, so I'm going to read a few. The weddings of the poor are often anything but poor. They function as working class Oscar nights, a rare avenue for glamour. The young women were unrecognizable out of their dungarees, work boots, straw hats, and sun-blocking sleeves. Their hair cascaded about their pale, exposed shoulders. Their painted lips left red marks on the lips of cups. The men did the opposite, covering up to mark the occasion. They covered their tanned forearms and necks in long-sleeved collared shirts, tidied up their mandatory mustaches, draped their necks in gold crucifixes and chains. My eyes were most drawn to handsome Chulis, who I'm mispronouncing, in his slacks worn tight as a tourniquet, at once concealing and showcasing his thighs and sundry goods. I could not yet understand why I was riveted so, but neither could I stop gawking. And then a few pages later, Preemie, this schlumpy guy, to apply a little Yiddish to him, says, you write, Preemie couldn't dance well, but he could dance committedly, wobbling like a purple top on the verge of tipping over, but never straying from the rhythm, even when the syncopation got tricky. Then just a little further, La Migra comes, after him, and a bunch of the young men bolt. And you write, it scared me when several young workers bolted. They seemed so adult to me mere moments before, so full of the bravado and that physical competence of young men, hefting bushel baskets of garlic onto their shoulders with thoughtless ease. In a moment, they'd been stripped of that and been made into prey, fleeing to hide underneath cars or behind the stacked crates of garlic. And just these descriptions are so vivid and so incisive and capture, give us, and I see totally what you mean about the visuality of your stories as well as the narrativity of your visual art. One more piece from this story for everybody, and then maybe we should have you read a bit and get, where are we time-wise? No, we still have a little bit more time to talk about it. So I don't know if he says, or you write about the boys and girls fighting over the porn stash. It was now a war for the victory of boys or girls, an excruciating binary to a sissy boy like me. The chess game was foreboding. I wanted to tell Sylvie where the books were, but that would show Cesar I wasn't a real boy. Surely he would punish me, severing my tenuous connections to the worlds of boys. I would be exiled to the world of girls, and surely they would send me away too, because I wasn't one of them, or even a good enough ally to them. Troubled for yet another night, I counted sheep in the dark, then horses. Deep into a chicken count, I finally fell asleep. And that's kind of funny, but terrifying. And it just feels like there's this incredible precision on the scale of sentences and phrases and evoking these people and the ways they change and exist. Their identities are circumstantial and fluid, the ways that they connect and fail to connect. And I know you work really hard on this, and I wonder if you want to talk about the sentences and and just the business of writing and rewriting to get these things.
It's interesting because I think in the book there's a bunch of stories that are told in a very kind of stripped down language, like this, especially the younger, the stories where Gordo is kind of younger. A lot of them are written in a kind of a stripped down language, which I tried to infuse with the poetry again of how a kid's mind might work. But then there's some of them, like the Nasty Book Wars, that are written in an adult kind of voice, and with all of those kind of flourishes that you called out in that writing. I really, this is simplistic, but I just want it to be pretty. Like I want the language to be really pretty. And so that's what I'm working towards in those stories, especially where you have the adult voice. I like, and I suppose in a sense, it's like, I think there's something gay there, and it's not exclusively gay, but for me, it reads as a kind of a gay thing of, you want it to feel aesthetic, you want it to feel sophisticated and urbane and pretty. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that's kind of my initial thoughts on that.
It feels beautiful to me because it's so incisive and true and vivid. It gives us such a compelling sense of who these people are and how these moments reveal them. This moment of conflict for Gordo, this moment of dancing for Primi, this moment when the young men stop feeling kind of powerful and confident and become frightened prey and things like that. But it brings up one of my lifelong questions, which kind of raised for me again. I have a nephew who's now 11. When he was not yet 4 or not yet 5, I think, his favorite colors when he was 3 were red, purple, and pink. And I felt like pink was this really interesting business because we all know boys are not supposed to like pink. And so I was like, it was like my research project, like, when is he going to find out he can't like pink and how's it going to happen? So I just remember asking him when he was not yet 5, and I just felt, and it was when I really realized that masculinity is a process of renunciation, all the things you're not allowed to have and be and say and feel and like, flowers and anything pretty and certain colors and certain even textures and things that are silky and flimsy and gossamer and iridescent and things like that. And it's like, how, like, this is not so much about the book, but it's like, how did masculinity position itself as oppositional to beauty? And like, what the fuck is going on with the guys? Not that either of them are experts on straight men. They're like the eternal conundrum we have to navigate around, but still.
Or that there is an acceptable beauty and there's unacceptable beauty.
You mean like a 68 Chevy Beauty versus?
Yes, like that. Or I'm very intrigued, for instance, of the love of that men will often have for horses. Like I watch them with horses. Mexico has this intense kind of horsey culture, as many countries do. Horsey culture plays out across all different countries, across continents. But you see the tenderness, and you can see that they are in love, and it's the beauty of the creature that's the linchpin there, and that is an acceptable love to have. That's an acceptable kind of beauty fixation to have. And as you said, a 68 muscle car, which I'm very susceptible to, by the way, is another kind of beauty that is an okay beauty to have. So yeah.
Hey, Matt, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was hoping we can get you to read one more time before we get to the Q&A.
That sounds great.
I'm sorry to interrupt this beautiful conversation, but yeah, we did want to.
Thank you for keeping us on track, because we'll just go on and on.
That'd be all right with me, seriously.
I want to read to you a little excerpt from the newest and longest story in the book, which is called Alex. And in this story, Gordo is now, something in the neighborhood of maybe 9 years old, and maybe 10 even. But a new neighbor has moved in, and there's a couple, and the woman in the couple, Delia, is in trouble, and Gordo is starting to figure out that there's something going wrong. And this is about an exchange they had in the yard through an ivy-covered kind of fence that divides the two yards. So this is about Gordo and Delia, and Gordo uncovering that there's something going on. So, and this is in the voice of Gordo. A few weeks later, I'm hanging clothes on the clothesline and I hear my name. It's soft at first, so I don't really notice, but it gets louder. Gordo. 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 I can't figure out where the voice is coming from till I notice it's coming from the ivy fence between our house and Alex's. It's me, Delia, says the ivy. Hi, Delia, I say. I didn't see you. Gordo, I'm wondering, do you know how to fix this? I hear the sounds of ivy leaves and vines getting pushed aside. Then I see Delia's hand holding a transistor radio with a suitcase handle on the top. She pushes it through a hole in the fence over to our side. I walk towards the hand and take the radio. Your radio is broken, I ask? Yes. No, I don't know, maybe, says Delia. I take the radio from her hand. Turn it on, says Delia. I find the on-off button and push it. The radio starts playing When I Need You. I change the station. It's Cornelio Reyna's Barrio Pobre. I change it again and it's a football game. Boring. I change it one more time and it's Rock the Boat. That's my song. I turn up the volume. It sounds good. Your radio sounds okay to me, Delia. I know it sounds like it's good, but it's broken. It's different. I bought this radio from El Salvador when I came. I wanted to know what was happening back in my country. But when I turn it on here, it talks mostly in English. I can't hear the radio voices from home. I turn the dial to where the news should be, and all I hear is rock and roll. What happened to the voices from home? I'm not sure how to explain it to her, but I try. The radio is different in every place, I say. When we go visit family in San Jose, the radio is different. Different music, different news. You can't hear the voices from back home in your country. They're too far away. Oh, says Delia. I can tell from her awe that this is bad news. I really wanted to hear the voices from home, says Delia. I miss them so much. It makes me feel lonely. I thought the voices from home lived inside the radio and I could bring them to Watsonville. No, you can't. I'm so stupid, she says. I'm a burra. Oh, no, you're not, Delia. You just didn't know how the radio works. Here, let me give you back your radio. Delia pushes back some ivy like a curtain on her end. Through the hole, I see a corner of her face. She has a puffy eye. It's black and purple. I don't say nothing. I push the radio through the ivy and she takes it. Thanks, Gordo, she says. She sounds really sad. I hear her walking away. I hear her back door open and then shut. I finish hanging the clothes. I'm not sure what to do. Ma's always telling me to mind my own business. She says I'm like some nosy old lady. Black eyes are top secret. 2 times Ma got a black eye from Pa, and everybody said nothing about it. I guess you're supposed to shut up like nothing happened and swallow the story. But Delia needs help. So what should I do?
Yeah, it's so wonderful. Please, mi gente, give it up for Jaime and his wonderful new book, as well as the one and only Rebecca Solnit. Man, we should just have you all on for 24 hours talking. We got the Q&A section, I guess we should get to real quick. Oh, this is medicina, Jaime. It really is hearing these stories.
Thank you.
For real. But let me get to some of these burning questions some of the beautiful people in the Zoom mundo were asking. Sandy Calvo was asking, Jaime, do you have any plans to translate Gordo into Spanish?
That is a possibility, and we have to see how this book does. It's just barely coming out, and if there is interest, I would be delighted and a little bit terrified about what it means to try to translate, because it's already kind of a Spanglish book. So what happens when you go all Spanish with it? I don't know. I always keep in mind that kind of that old chestnut about translation, that translation is to translate is to betray or something like that. But I would be very excited about it, even though I'm not sure exactly how one does a translation like that. But yeah.
One word at a time. All right. And Forrest asks, will Jaime tell us about his thoughts and processes of finding and selecting the narrator for the audio version of the book? Ooh, an audio version of the book?
There is an audio version of the book, and Penguin Random House Audiobooks did the audiobook recording. I'd hope to do it myself, but Penguin really frowns on authors reading their own books. I think they probably had too many bad experiences with authors trying to be voice actors. So I understand their perspective. They sent me a couple of samples of these 2 Chicano veteran voice actors, and we just picked the one. We picked one of them, and I haven't heard it yet. I'm a little trepidatious about it. We'll see. We'll see what it sounds like. As I mentioned to you, when I write, I'm constantly talking out loud to myself. So my voice is the only voice I associate with this writing. So it's going to be interesting to just hear how somebody interprets.
Can you tell us who the actor was? Do you remember the name, the Chicano actors? Is he?
Alejandro, I'm sorry, I can't remember. I'm going to get it wrong.
Oh, we have a boxing question from Suki O'Kane. The boxer thing, was that a Prunedale hope?
Oh, that was actually, the boxing equipment was purchased for me by my dad while we were doing a visit to my grandmother in Mexicali, right across the border. And I brought the gear back home to San Juan Bautista, California with me. And that was where the silliness of, trying to make me into a boxer kind of played out. It was in Mexicali and then later in San Juan Bautista. And he really did buy the gear for me, and I really did love the jump rope. And that was about the extent of it. And I love the boots, of course, which were fabulous. So.
Yeah, okay. And I know you touched on this a little bit, Jaime, but Ted was asking, how does your editing process work? Do your inner writer and editor battle, or is it a smooth, integrated process? How close are the stories to the first drafts?
I would say some of them came out like pretty much well-formed. Like, it's that feeling you have sometimes that you're just channeling something. It's just the story just kind of moves through you. It comes out, it's almost whole. Other ones were needed much more revision, rewriting, rethinking. The longest story in there, Alex, I labored over that one tremendously, not just because it was so lengthy compared to what I usually do, but also I was treading. I felt like I was treading into something I didn't quite understand. So it took a lot of revision and rethinking. So it varies a lot. Sometimes it's pretty minor, pretty light touch, and sometimes it's pretty extensive. And I don't have fights between the writer part of me and the editing part of me. I think I feel pretty comfortable with those two being integrated. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you a question, Jaime.
Yes.
I love that. I love, the Mexica, the Mexican gallows humor. It's humor is resistant. Familia, abuela's hitting you with chanclas is funny as heck and all that stuff. But I know you get that gallows humor from your familia, but were there other writers that you read that you sort of found that in as well, or is that strictly like a
Yes, I think I was very much affected by a bunch of different funny writers. This is what a nerdy child I was. When I was like in 5th or 6th grade, I was really into Irma Bombeck, which, as some of you might remember, was this wonderful humorist who just wrote like, domestic humor, like talking about doing the laundry and cleaning up after the kids. And I just was so tickled by that. And I would like take out, 2 of them at a time. I was really into her writing as an elementary school kid. And from then I've had many love affairs with humor writers. I really was impacted by David Sedaris. I think he's so amazing. I was impacted by Quentin Crisp. I was very impacted, especially for this book, by Toni Cade Bambara's book, Gorilla My Love. And she has this brilliant, sassy little girl first, narrator for these stories. Who I love that writing so much. So yeah, Toni Cade Bambara and David, and I can't remember his name, but he wrote Confederacy of Dunces. I can't remember the name.
John Gregory Dunn.
Oh, is that who it was? Okay, yeah. I really like that
One
book.
of those 3.
Yeah.
Well, Irma Bombeck's book covers were the best. Oh my God.
Oh, and I used to read James Thurber as well in elementary school. I was really into that. Looking back on it now, I probably didn't understand half the humor because it was kind of ironic and sly, but I got enough of it to know I liked it. So there have been very varied and sundry humor writers that I've really enjoyed so much.
And Francis Phillips is asking, Jaime, you talk about your life in writing and in visual art, but you're sitting in front of a wall of LPs. I'm curious about the musica that's most moving to you. It's a good question, Francis. I was wondering the same thing myself.
I should say this kind of magnificent wall O vinyl is my partner, Mark Smotroff. Hey, babe. He's right over there across the room. And he has a lifelong and avid collector. And this is a small kind of fraction of his life work of collecting wonderful vinyl. So I'll say that first. Music, it's interesting. I remember being a teenager, and at that time, I felt like I was completely permeable to music. Like it would just get into me and go so deep into my bones, and just a variety of music that I was completely enamored of. And I remember being a teenager and just laying on the carpet with my face pressed against the foam of the speaker. Like I just wanted to have complete physical communion with music. At that time, and I think most of the great kind of musical loves I had happened in my younger years, because over time I find that whatever permeability was there has really dramatically gone down, and there's not a lot of new music that gets into my bones that way. But I'll say that in that kind of very young era, I really enjoyed Jose Feliciano a lot. I really loved Pink Floyd. I really loved Simon and Garfunkel, Carole King. I adored all of them. There would be many more in the years that followed, but those were some of the first kind of big loves. Oh, and the very first and primordial great pop love was Diana Ross and the Supremes. So.
Yes, that sounds like a beautiful mixtape. For real. Poppy was wondering, do you still have a visual art practice? And if so, how do the two practices overlap, feed into each other? And also, what do you love to read yourself? It's a two-parter.
Okay. So I would say that my visual art practice has been dormant for a few years. I still think about it a lot. I think about visual art a lot. Just a couple of weekends ago, my partner and I got to go to the Palace of the Legion of Honor to see the Wangechi Mutu exhibition, which was just stunning, truly stunning exhibition. And that kind of reminded me of what it felt like to just confront something that just, makes the hairs on your arm stand on end. It was so beautiful and powerful to be reconnected to visual art that way. She's fantastic. So I would say that my practice is pretty dormant. I still have a great unrequited love for visual art. I think I love it more than it loves me. So I live with that, with that unrequited thing. As related to that, like one of my favorite kind of reading experiences has been for quite some time now. I really love graphic novels. Really enjoy graphic novels, whether they're kind of super kind of visually oriented, like Jeff Darrow's work. I love his Shaolin Monk series. It's just the most gory, bloody blood orgy ever, but this draftsmanship is stunning. So I cannot get over this guy. But then there's the more literary stuff as well. I just read a beautiful one. Was it called La Casa? And it was about 3 siblings in Spain whose father has passed away, and they're trying to figure out whether to keep or sell this home that he had kept. And I just found it such a quiet, simple, and beautiful graphic novel about just, so much of the real drama of our lives is so quiet. Just trying to figure out, what do you do with this place and all of the memories that are packed into it, and all of the history of that love, the bitterness, the contentiousness. It's fantastic. So yeah.
Oh, Olga, we got a couple more for you, Jaime, and then that'll be it, I promise.
Okay.
We got
I'm happy
Olga.
to keep going. So I'm happy
Oh
to
man,
keep going.
they're going to keep putting them in here. It's beautiful. And you are getting so much love in the comments. I don't want to distract you too much, but there's so much, yeah.
I haven't peeked in yet. So everyone who sent a kind comment, thank you so much. I won't be able to respond to it during this session, but I really appreciate it, and I hope to have a look at all of them.
And a lot of offers to translate for you as well.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Olga wanted to ask, has your familia read Gordo? What's their reaction?
They just got it a couple of days ago. So we will see how they're responding. I'm, aunts, uncles, cousins, they're coming out in force and supporting. And I'm going to be so curious to talk to them because some of them are going to recognize themselves in those stories. And what the question that came up earlier about our responsibility when we're trying to tell people's stories that involve, yes, us, but also those around us. I think that this is part of, how I'll be learning about that, is talking to them. What do they think? So yeah.
And Carrie is wondering, let's see. This isn't a question, Carrie says, but just a statement. It's so a question. Your writing is really fable-like, Jaime. I guess the question she's asking is, do you feel like you had a vacation? Do you feel like you had a vacation as a kid? These two things seem connected.
I'm not sure. It's such a good question. I remember in the 3rd grade, we had an Easter story writing contest in my 3rd grade class. And we were supposed to illustrate and write an Easter story. And so I wrote this story about the Easter rabbit having a little plane that he would drive around to do his work. And I did the drawings that go with it, and I got the blue ribbon basically. And sometimes I think, is that what set everything in motion? Was suddenly getting all this, because it was such a strange feeling to walk back to school. I'll always remember like walking back to school, going down the hall, and seeing everybody's. They gave us these nice big pieces of that chunky brown paper we used to use, and they had it all taped up on the wall. And I got to mine, and it had a little blue ribbon on it, and I didn't even know what that meant at first. I thought, did I do something wrong? Because I didn't understand what that meant. And then, in class, they explained what was going on, and they had given prizes. And I remember it just made such an impression on me at that time. And sometimes I think, was that the genesis of it all? I don't know.
The origin story. Okay, well, that's it for the questions. I don't believe it. People, if you have a moment and you feel comfortable doing it, I know some of you aren't wearing pantalones in the Zoom room, but on video yourself, say hello to Jaime, say hello to Rebecca for such a wonderful, engaging evening celebrating Gordo, the release of Gordo.
It's so lovely to see so many of our friends here, and this book is just amazing. Buy copies for everyone. And Jaime, I hope that Watsonville is going to celebrate this book big time, in San Juan Bautista and Gilroy.
Thank
And
you.
we should be like attacking your local libraries to do things. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Books are magic. Onward.